So people ask me, what's the solution to the tyrannical, literally the tyrannical, evil inhumanity of the institution of government? Right? They want to believe that life isn't just about, we're born, we live, we do the best we can as indentured servants, and then we die. Is that just something that we have to accept and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it? Well, let's consider, what are the alternatives? What are the possibilities? Um, I know that when people get angry about having their paycheck stolen, about having to pay taxes on their own land, about having to send $150 in for a speeding ticket, even though they were just driving down the road, never hurt anybody, their first reaction, their knee-jerk reaction, is violence. They just want to kick the shit out of somebody. Preferably the cops that are abusing them, right? Because the cops are just a legalized gang of road pirates, right? They're the states, the politicians trained dogs. But violence is a sign of ignorance, pure and simple. And violent revolution against a government institution has always, throughout history, led to the next tyrannical regime. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, including the United States of America. There was no revolution by the people. It was Ben Franklin went to France, convinced King Louis and the King of Spain to commit troops and other resources to come to the colonies and kick the British out. It was a violent regime change, an international coup for international political expedience. That's all it was. And it immediately led to the next tyrannical regime. George Washington even insisted on being referred to as His Excellency. And he immediately imposed a tax on alcohol, which led to the Whiskey Rebellion, where Washington sent federal troops. This is 1787, somewhere around there. He sent federal troops to squash the people who didn't want to pay the whiskey tax, right? To next tyrannical regime. And it's just grown from there. So violent revolution is not only impractical, it solves nothing. A lot of people get killed for nothing, and you're right back where you started. So violent revolution is not an option. Some people say that, well, if you don't like the way the system works, get involved, right? Get involved in politics. But how ridiculous is that? The institution itself is an evil institution. It's an immoral institution. Right? I mean, every dollar that the government has, it took from somewhere else. The government doesn't produce anything. It's not like it competes in the market. It produces a product that society wants, and then they sell it on the market, and people voluntarily buy it. They produce nothing. They simply take whatever they want. Right? And even the people that are in politics are being paid, and they're being paid with the money that's taken from other people. So just occupying an office in that institution means that you're being paid with blood money. So while you're part of an evil institution, being paid with money and supporting your participation in this evil institution with money and resources that are taken from other people, the people that produced it, you're supposed to be part of the solution of somehow ending this evil institution, right? It's ridiculous. No decent person would ever get involved in politics. They would never do it, because if the Bloods and the Crips are harassing your neighborhood, you don't become a Blood or a Crip to get the Bloods and the Crips to stop harassing your neighborhood, right? It's just an asinine, philosophy or ideology, and it's just another philosophy and ideology that gets thrown around to keep people participating in government. Ron Paul was great at that. He was in government for 27 years, and absolutely nothing improved. In fact, over that same time period, everything got exponentially worse. But what Ron Paul did do was attract people who were out of politics, or maybe never even were involved in the first place, and got them involved in politics. They were sign waving, wearing little stickers, sending money, right? So he was kind of like the gatekeeper to the corral, and he herded people back into the corral for the Republican Party, because even after Ron Paul was out of it, the people who got involved because of Ron Paul stayed involved with the Republican Party and started supporting the next candidate, right? Whether it was Trump or whoever. So getting involved is asinine. You can't become part of the problem and claim to be working to solve the problem. So violent revolution is not a solution. Never has been, never will be. Getting involved in politics is not a solution. Never has been, never will be. Voting is something else people like to throw on, but it's just like when they say get involved. Voting is just another way to make sure you stay involved in the politics so that you don't, realize that it's meaningless. And this doesn't even address the mathematics of voting, that no single vote matters. The only vote that matters is the deciding vote, and the chances of your vote being the deciding vote are less than being struck by lightning. So voting is just another part of the institution that gives people the illusion that their voice matters and that they can control the government by checking off a box in a ballot somewhere. In every election season, the politicians will come and they'll tell you everything that's wrong with society because of the current politicians. And then you'll vote a new politician. And then the next 4 years, the new politicians will tell you everything that's wrong with society because of the current politicians. And you see the vicious cycle of idiocy. Right? Nothing ever seems to get solved. If you listen to the politicians, nothing ever seems to get solved. Every 4 years, everything is still wrong. So how can you claim that voting makes a difference? All right. Violent revolution, not a solution. Getting involved in politics, not a solution. Voting, not a solution. Protesting, Jesus Christ, this one kills me. People go out and sometimes they even get their permits from the very institution that they're protesting in order so they can protest that institution. Think about that for a minute. And even if they don't get permits, even if everybody just gets out in the streets and they start yelling and screaming and chanting and holding up their stupid little signs, they're doing it in some public place somewhere, and the politicians are nowhere around. And they're surrounded by cops who are making sure that they get corralled into some small area, wherever that is. And then, of course, if they get too loud, then they blast them with water cannons or smoke bombs or some other sort of directed energy apparatus. All the while, the politicians are home. They got a cognac in one hand, a cigar in the other, and their lover on their lap. Yeah, watching the protest on TV, laughing. And people stay out in the cold and the rain and the snow, and they're protesting and they're chanting and they're making speeches. And they've been doing it for thousands of years, and yet here we still are. Protesting doesn't matter. Violent revolution, getting involved in politics, voting, protesting are not solutions to the evil, tyrannical institution of government. People say education. We need to be educated. People need to understand what's going on, and then you can change, quote unquote, change the hearts and minds of people. Bullshit, but thanks for playing. People have been talking about the tyrannical nature of the institution of government for thousands of years. Socrates, Aristotle, the ancient Greeks, all of it, nothing new there. The romantic revisionist version of histories that we get in public schools, right? People say we have to remember history so that we don't repeat it, but that's all we do is repeat it. So what good is it, right? You're not going to convince anybody. I just read something today, actually, it was very, very smart. It said, think about how hard it is for you to change things in your life just for yourself. How are you going to convince other people that they need to change, right? And it's the truth. You're not going. Some people, there are people, and they'll say, I was a statist, and then I got turned on to Ron Paul, and then I became a libertarian, which is still a statist. And then they'll say, well, after that, I went to the next step, and I became a voluntarist or whatever that is. And then I became an anarchist, and I realized, there's no saving this institution. We just need to get rid of it. So there are people who went on their own journey, but they went on that journey. There was information available, but they were led to the information, but they chose to read it. And you have to be, you can't help somebody who's not willing to help themselves. And there are far too many people out there, all over the world, who depend on the government in one way or another. Billions of people. first of all, who depend on the government to put food on the table, either directly, indirectly, ancillary. Even the guys who the tax preparation companies, right? The companies that help people with their back taxes. There's just tons of ways out there that people depend on the government to put food on the table. You're never going to educate them about anything. You're never going to convince them to change, that the government is an evil institution. They don't care, right? They want to eat, and they have no other way to put food on the table. There's been institutions around for forever, educating people. But the thing is that once every generation gets educated and dies, then the next generation comes along, and the whole education process has to start over again. So education is not going to do anything. Writing books is not going to do anything. Making speeches is not going to do anything. It's going to make a name for the people writing the books and making the speeches, right? There's a lot of celebritarians and the like out there. But it's not a solution, right? So violent revolution, getting involved, voting, protesting, education are not possible to evoke real change in humanity and the evil institution of government. So once you've eliminated everything that's impossible, whatever remains, regardless of how improbable, must be the solution. So there's only one thing that remains, right? Simply disobeying, simply not acting as if the government has any sort of legitimate authority over your life, and having the courage to disobey. Because the next thing you need to be able to do is to mount an effective defense against the state's dogs when they come after you, right? Because they're going to come. Most everybody listening to this right now has been on the receiving end of those dogs, right? That pack of dogs, that pack of wild animals, that starts salivating at the mouth when they see one of their brothers in blue jumps on somebody for whatever reason, and just like when one dog starts barking, all the others start barking. They all jump on and start beating the shit out of somebody, and then at the very end, he's dead. And they're like, well, what did this guy do? They don't even know what he did, and they killed him, right? So we know the dogs are coming. So the question is, it's got to be, the solution has to be completely defensive. Nothing offensive about it. We go about our lives, minding our own business, respecting the free will of others, not causing any problems. And then when the state tells us we have to do something, whatever that might be, we simply don't do it. And that's the first step, right? And the first key to this is surviving the initial encounter, right? So for example, in Romania, sometimes I ride my bike through the piazza. It's against the law to ride your bike through the piazza. They have their enforcers roaming the piazzas to stop you and to write you a citation. When I see these guys, I turn and go the other way. I survived the encounter, the initial encounter. Pure and simple. That's it, right? I know that's a very simplistic example, but that's the idea. You'd be surprised how many Romanians would just simply say, oh, geez, I'm caught now, and stop and get off the bike and hand over their ID and take the ticket and so on and so forth. So the first step is simply disobeying, not obeying. It's not even disobeying because you have no obligation to obey, just simply ignoring this institution and their enforcers, their dogs, right? And surviving the initial encounter somehow. The second step is surviving the initial encounter anonymously so that the dogs can't come after you, right? So that's the two pieces that you need somehow. And surviving the initial encounter sometimes is the trickiest part. So the idea is we want to be completely defensive. We're never going to convince these animals that what they're doing is wrong, right? We're not. They've been indoctrinated their whole lives. They were groomed specifically for this job, for this role. This is all they're qualified to do, regardless of how many college degrees they might have. Their mentality, their psychology is specific, and they've been groomed their entire lives through the Boy Scouts, through propaganda on the TV, through movies, through their military service. Maybe they did ROTC, who knows what. Their entire lives, they've been groomed to be government enforcers, and that's why they are government enforcers, right? So we're not going to convince them otherwise. We have one choice, and that is when they attack, find an effective defense against them, okay? So what does this mean? I was talking to Nick Garza about this the other day. What does that mean, an effective defense? Nothing offensive whatsoever. And that's not only important to be effective, but it's also important because simply defending yourself is moral, right? Um, I think it would be very difficult for anybody to find fault with somebody simply defending themselves, doing absolutely nothing offensive or aggressive, right? So I think it was Sun Tzu who was a psychopath, but in his writings, in his book, The Art of War, he talks about the need to have to be on the side of morality, because then you can get other people to side with you. Maybe not physically, but at least in principle, they'll side with you, right? That's why when a foreign force invades a country, even though those in that country have an inferior military presence, they can successfully defend themselves against a superior military force, because the superior military force, those guys, those soldiers are just trying to survive, right? They're not fighting with their hearts and their souls. They're not defending their homes. The people in Iraq, the people in Afghanistan, the people in Vietnam, they're fighting for their homes, their families, their livelihoods, their culture, their history, their parents, everything, right? And the soldiers that are sent there, and you can hear this on every single video of every soldier ever talking, right? It's even in their credo, right? Their goal is to survive. That's it. They're not there, fighting for the greater good. They're not there for anything. They are there because they were told, they were ordered to go there. They don't want to be there, but they're ordered to go there, and their goal is just to survive. There's a psychological advantage. There's a psychological disadvantage to those guys, and a psychological advantage to those whose country is being invaded, and they're fighting for their homes, right? Similar scenario right here, right? So the idea is, we need an effective defense, to the point that the government's enforcers convince themselves. Now remember, I said you're never going to convince them. You're never going to convince them that what they're doing is wrong. You are never going to convince them to change, right? They need to convince themselves. It's similar to children. Anybody who's a parent knows you can talk to your kids till you're blue in the face. They'll never learn until they experience it themselves, right? You can tell a kid, don't do this, you're going to get hurt. Don't do that, you're going to get hurt. They're still going to do it. I'm guilty of it myself. And when they get hurt, then they're going to go, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? That's the strategy. It's the only effective strategy that remains, actually, and it's the only one that remains because it's the only effective one. So the idea is we need to come up with an effective defensive measure so that these animals convince themselves they simply cannot force their will on us anymore. All right, let me start with an extreme example. And this is what I was discussing with Nick Garza. Yeah? Imagine a superhero. Imagine Superman. Okay? Bear with me. I'm going someplace with this. Imagine Superman. Superman let's say in this day and age, he goes into a store or he goes into a public building without a mask, doesn't social distance, breaks all the rules, basically, thumbing his nose to the state. And the state's enforcers try to apprehend him, and of course they can't. So then they open fire on him. Doesn't matter, bullets bounce off him, right? So he simply goes about his business, and eventually they'll stop shooting at him, they'll stop, trying to grab him, because, he can just blow on them and they go flying across the room. But he doesn't have to blow on them. He just has to exist. And eventually they're just going to say, we can't do anything to force this guy to obey us, right? That's the idea. We have to have, and it may involve technology that doesn't exist yet, and that's the technology we need to be looking at and trying to develop somehow. So we also have some very, very real examples of this philosophy of self-defense in nature. Think of the armadillo. When the armadillo feels threatened, he has this outer armor and he rolls up into a ball. He does nothing offensive. He does absolutely nothing aggressive. He simply rolls up into a ball. He's surrounded by this armor, and he just lays there rolled up in a ball until the aggressor, the other animal, realizes there's nothing he can do and goes away. This is a real life example. I think the porcupine does something similar, right? So real life examples in nature of the philosophy that I'm talking about right now, right? You cannot, we will never convince these people that what they're doing is wrong. What we have to do is come up with defensive measures that allow us to successfully defend ourselves until they convince themselves there's nothing they can do about it. Okay? Much, much more difficult to do than it is to say, I know, I get it. But that's where we have to focus our efforts. Okay? All the rest is noise. It's all been done before, and yet here we are. Now the question is, how do we develop this technology? What do we do? How do we put it all together? We really need to start thinking outside the box, way outside the box. Things that may be right in front of us every day, but we haven't thought about yet, right? But this is the answer. Call it the armadillo philosophy of defense against tyranny, right? Whatever you want. But that's the idea. We have to come up with a way where we can go about our lives, and when we're attacked by the government's enforcers, we're able to successfully defend ourselves either by ourselves or by working together with one another. And we just sit there. We don't do anything aggressive. We don't use force against them. We may even be able to come up with a way that if when they use force against us, it actually harms them without us having to do anything. So, for example, some people have developed electrified clothing, right? It's supposed to be for women, for self-defense, right? It's a jacket or whatever, and you're out in public, but it has electrical wiring going through it, just like a stun gun, right? Just like a taser. And when somebody grabs you with their bare hand, they get a taser-like shock, right? The person wearing the jacket did absolutely nothing aggressive, absolutely nothing offensive. The aggressor was harmed because of his actions, so he can simply choose not to do that, and he won't be harmed. This is the idea. This is the philosophy. And if we can come up with enough solutions like this, I think it would be very, very difficult for even the most hardcore statists, to find fault with that. They may want to find reasons to fault it, but they'll just be nonsense. Okay. So when you're looking for solutions, when you're thinking, what can we do? I honestly believe this is the future, and this is the road, this is the path we have to focus on when trying to come up with these solutions. I have some ideas of my own. Anybody's interested, let me know. We can chat on WhatsApp or Signal or something like that.